Joining us at Crime Scene today is Judy Powell, has over 35 years experience, executive management position for police in Canada and the U.S., teaches for the FBI LEDA, Executive Development Association, and has been to many police departments teaching them crisis intervention and public information officer and training media, how police to deal with media around the country. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So Judy, if you could sort of briefly explain sort of the purpose or reason that law enforcement agencies designate a person as a PIO to deal with the media.
Well, if we didn't have public information officers, I don't think too many police departments would put public information as number one when something happens, especially crisis. Public information officers, much to the chagrin sometimes of the media, are there really to serve them and to communicate with our community. I think folks need to realize that PIOs are there to help get information out. It is their main job to communicate, and today, more than ever, we have to realize that communicating with our community is really a huge priority for law enforcement.
So now you train information officers, and obviously there's many law enforcement agencies that they just shove someone in that position, and they expect them to deal with the media and with little training, little knowledge. So obviously, explain the importance of someone actually getting the training and understanding.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I think law enforcement professionals are finally starting to realize the importance of communications. Saying the wrong thing can almost be as bad as a bad police officer use of force or a bad police officer involved shooting. We've got to realize, and law enforcement is getting to that point, they're realizing that, boy, making sure that we say the right thing at the right time so folks can do the right thing at the end of the day is really important. And law enforcement, I think in the United States, has been a little bit behind our friends in Britain, in Australia, and in Canada in realizing the importance of communications, but we're starting to get there.
You started in Canada.
I did.
Yes, okay, so big difference between there and the U.S. and dealing with the media, similar?
Significant differences only in the fact that I do believe Canada was a little bit ahead of the curve when it came to understanding the importance of communications. However, very much like the United States, most police departments had sworn public information officers, so police officers that were public information officers. There's a challenge there because when you become a police officer, you're probably not thinking that you're going to be a media person or you're going to be communicating with the media on a regular basis. I was one of the first two civilian public information officers in Canada. I had a very smart chief who realized maybe it would be a good idea to have someone who has some communications or media background. Here in the United States, there is a move towards hiring people with either public relations, communications, or journalism, broadcast journalism background. I honestly think the best combination is having sworn members that are police officers and professional staff or civilian members that have an understanding of communication, because working together, they can absolutely make sure we're communicating what we need to communicate.
Now, you talked to grabbing people with that sort of in their background. So what was your background? What brought you to working as a PIO in Canada?
I always wanted to be a cop, but I was too short. At 5'3" 3/4", didn't quite make that 5'6" height restriction. So even though I always wanted to be a police officer, I knew at that point I couldn't be one. So I went into public relations, worked in professional sports for a number of years, and I know that doesn't sound like it would translate over, but seriously, communications and public relations strategies and tactics are really the same across most disciplines. That interest was still there. I was working as a journalist, a broadcast journalist in Halifax, Nova Scotia, when I had the opportunity to talk to the current chief of police that was there and said, I think you're missing the boat on being able to communicate some issues that were going on in their department. And fortunate for me, within 30 days of after having that conversation, I was now working with Halifax Regional Police, and it was the beginning of an amazing career.
So now you talked about being in sports and really maybe be hard to make that connection, but honestly, certainly the sports industry is a business, and they're there as far as their money, and it's about their image. And so certainly in public service, it's about our image and bringing that across. And that's something I know that you speak about highly in trying to correct that image and bring that image. So if you could sort of just talk about the purpose in that, the importance in that in law enforcement.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. I am really passionate about it, and I think a lot of folks might think, why do police care about their public image? Well, public image of police go back years and years. It's not something that's brand new. Sir Robert Peel talked about it in England years and years and years ago when he said the public are the police and the police are the public. Folks need to understand, and law enforcement needs to understand, that we need to develop a trusting, legitimate relationship with our communities in order for us to be able to do our job. If the community doesn't trust their police, if the community doesn't believe their police, if a community has no transparency with their police department, they're not going to help us. And the tie between clearance rates, for example, I mean, that's a term that cops understand.
Right.
It is absolutely true that if you have a great relationship with your community, your clearance rates are going to go up because you're going to have folks that'll talk to people. You're going to have a shooting scene or a homicide scene where the community's going to feel free and comfortable talking with you because they trust you. If you have a non-trusting community, you're not going to get that information. And you will really see when it comes to that image of the department, when there's trust, when there's a feeling that the police department is professional, that they care about the community, that they're well trained, you are going to have a much better relationship. It's going to keep our community safer. It's going to push our clearance rates up. It's also going to keep our cops a lot safer. So I think when folks think about communication and branding for law enforcement, they think about unicorns and butterflies. And one of the things that I talk about is it's not about that. It's about safety in our community. It's about working together. NYPD has, I think, one of the best, and I don't even want to call it a slogan, but it's the best cornerstone for Public Safety Day. And what they say is community safety is a shared responsibility. And folks are now realizing the only way that becomes a shared responsibility is by developing that trust. How do we develop that trust? Communication.
Well, you brought up that shared responsibility and something that you had written in an article and you spoke about, and it's sort of ingrained in police culture, is talking about the sheepdog, right? And with Carl Grossman, who goes around and teaches about it, is a great speaker and certainly passionate about the safety of officers. But you've sort of taken that term and think that it somewhat divides the public.
It does, and I totally understand that, we are the sheepdog, the community is the sheep. But I think we really need to look a little bit deeper into that. When we make that divide, even with the thin blue line, and I'm the first one that admits I have a thin blue line license plate on the front of my truck, we're making a division between us and the community. And we're essentially saying, community, you are sheepdog, or you are sheep. That's really not very complimentary. And by the way, you have no responsibility for safety. I am the person that is responsible for public safety. I am the one that will protect you from everything that's bad. That then says to the community, by the way, you can abdicate any responsibility you have for safety. I'm the person who will keep you safe. I think we need to rethink that a little bit in the fact that we got to work together. We are safer working together, and the more the community sees that they are part of the public safety equation, that is going to make our community safer. NYPD made a huge change to neighborhood policing, of having police officers in every neighborhood, and it really goes back to the policing how it was in the past, where you just had folks walking the streets, people knew everybody, and someone would come up to the community, or someone would come up to a community officer and say, hey, did you know this guy is doing this? And that's how you get intel. Any good homicide detective, any good gang detective, any good counterterrorism detective is going to tell you, we got to get information from the public. That's the only way we're going to be ahead of the game. And that means erasing that thin blue line and having those conversations.
Now, and we've talked about the community on many times. I mean, it's not just about public safety. It seems that police are where everything gets turned to, right? If they have trouble with anything that there's not an answer, than the police are handling it. And so again, that's back to that community relations. And you brought up earlier, Robert Peel, that community policing is nothing new. I mean, it's really many years old. It goes back to the beginning of what we consider modern policing. We can change the term, we can call it whatever we want today, but it's still about that community and relationship. Do you find out, you brought up New York, and I know that you work there, and it's a fascinating department and so many resources, right? I mean, I think there are 40,000
just a few.
40,000 officers.
Yeah,
I mean,
there are 36,000 officers, about 52,000 employees.
So the difference between a department of that size and down to the 10-man, the 12-man department, is it just as important? How do they still accomplish the same goal?
It's granular. In New York, we go down to specific neighborhoods, and they're true geographic neighborhoods. A lot of police departments are now starting to understand that perhaps electoral boundaries aren't a true boundary of a real neighborhood. And by putting officers in, the neighborhood coordination officers, in these unique neighborhoods in New York, all of a sudden, you have a police department of 10 people or 20 people. And the importance of getting to know folks is so key to neighborhood policing or community-oriented policing or whatever the term you want to use. It's really getting to know folks and letting folks feel comfortable in talking to the police officers. One of the things that they found pretty interesting in New York when they implemented neighborhood policing was that the cops were giving their phone numbers. And people in the stores and in the community are like, this cop gave me his or her phone number, and look, I can call them, and they actually answer the phone. Or I can text them, because of course nobody phones anybody anymore, we're just texting. And the amount of information that they're gleaning from the community is huge. I mean, to the point, if you join the NYPD now, part of your training as a recruit is going to spend time in a community, going to spend time in a neighborhood and learning about it and meeting those community influencers, because every community across the country has those informal influencers, not necessarily elected officials, that are kind of the leader in that community. Those are the folks that we got to get to know. Those are the folks that are going to give us a lot of information that we need in law enforcement to keep our community safe.
So by New York doing this, what was it, an immediate result? Did it come over time? I mean, what were the results that have come of this or seen of this besides the relationship? What's happened to crime?
The results speak for themselves. Crime has been at historic lows in New York, and it truly is on the backs of the hard work of the men and women on the street, the Detective Bureau, and everyone else. But the cultural shift towards neighborhood policing, it's tough. It's tough to shape, to move the culture of a department that's that big, to understand the value of this. But one of the most telling things, Red Hook, a part of New York that had challenges in dealing with its police officers. We were there talking to some folks there, and there was a young gentleman said to us, he says, back a number of years ago before neighborhood policing, when I saw the police, I would put my hands up. And he says, now when I see the police, I put my hand out. And to me, that is such an extraordinary exemplification of what neighborhood policing is about, that we were able to affect a person's perception of their police and their law enforcement by that interaction was huge. And I think that's something that I really talk a lot about too. Neighborhood policing and community relations isn't the PIO's job. It isn't the chief's job. It's every single employee of a department or an office's job. So not just the patrol officers, not just the professional staff or the civilians that work there. It's everybody's job, because that one interaction a police officer may have with someone in the community is going to form their opinion. And that's huge. And I think that's really important that police agencies and especially police leaders impart on to everyone in their department from the day that they join, from the day that they're a recruit with that department representing.
Well, it's something that you had brought up, and we're taught it, but it really sticks that a police officer may make 15, 30 traffic stops in a shift, and not actually remember any of the people. They're doing their job. They're enforcing the law, and but every person that you speak to, if you ask them how many times were you stopped on traffic, or to talk about that traffic stop, they remember it for life. So the interaction that we have, that we consider part of our job, and not to dismiss it, it's just part of what we do. It's what we love to do, and we're there, but we don't have those same memories, and the impact that it has to the public plays a huge factor.
It absolutely does. It's interesting. I mean, I remember I've one traffic ticket, and I got that traffic ticket, I think I was 21 years old, and I still remember the interaction I had with that police officer. It was benign. It was nothing. He gave me a ticket. I signed my name. I got my ticket. But I remembered it. I remember that he was professional. I remember that he was kind. My arm was in a cast, and he was very helpful. And those are the words that I then used to describe the Toronto Police Service. That is, and it's, I think it's really difficult for officers to understand the effect that they have on folks. And I think it's really important that we as leaders in law enforcement remind our cops what an important role they play. I've had the good fortune and blessing to work with Bill Bratton a number of times, former NYPD commissioner and chief of LAPD. And one of the things that Bill says is that cops count, police matter. And I think that's important that every cop understand that everything they do, it does matter. And it's hard for police officers, especially if they're serving in really challenging environments where not a lot of people like them, where you're not often getting a wave with 5 fingers. I think it's really important that we get those officers to see that not everyone in a community has horns and a tail, and making sure that we expose our officers to the majority of the people in our community that want to see us succeed, that want to help us, and that they see they're doing good work in their communities. In Baltimore, I'll never forget, we were in a pretty tough neighborhood, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and officers were dealing with a gang issue down the street. And I just walked up the street, and it was the middle of summer, and it was really hot. And there was a senior citizen that was sitting on her front porch. And I said, "Ma'am, can I come up and chat with you?" And she goes, "As long as nobody sees you." She had that concern. Right. So I came up on the porch, and I said, Does this bother you? Are you having issues with gang members? And she says, "I just keep to myself. I stay in the house during the day, and I'll come out and sit quietly, kind of in the back of my porch at night." And I said, "Well, why can't you move away?" And she said, "Well, I can't. This is my family's home. This is where I lived all my life." And she was so sweet. And I went, This is why police are here." And so I made a point to go back down the street after the cops were finished dealing what they were dealing. I said, "You need to come and meet this lady." Because that gave them the why. Because sometimes they're dealing with people that aren't happy to see them over and over and over, shift after shift after shift.
Right, they start wondering, why am I here?
Right.
What's the purpose?
And then when they had the opportunity to meet this lovely woman, all of a sudden you go, now I know why I'm here. I'm here protecting this lady. I'm here trying to allow her to live a life that she wants to live. And I think that's really important, that all of our officers are exposed to the majority of good people in their communities.
So now one of your expertise is going into challenging places such as Baltimore during difficult times and trying to turn it around and bring a better image and those type of things, something that you're an expert in. Where do you start? Where do you start when a department is in crisis that needs help with their image, that needs to rebrand or otherwise?
Tough question. Every department is unique. I think the first thing is going in with a chief or sheriff that is brave. It's a brave undertaking for a leader. I as a support to a chief or sheriff or chief executive, can do nothing without them being brave and without them being smart. I've had the very good fortune of working for some brilliant police leaders in my time, and I've learned everything that I know from them. But it really takes someone who is brave, who's dedicated to the men and women and to the community and where they serve, to one, take a look at something and saying, okay, we need to make some change. Because there's two things that cops hate: status quo and change. And when you're in there, especially if you're going to touch culture, that's a tough one. So the leadership needs to understand the value of brand and image and communication and why we want to do it. It's not just putting lipstick on a pig, pardon the pun, and just saying, oh, we're going to make this look good. I'm not a spin doctor, and I tell people in the classes, the public information officers and other folks I get to deal with, this is not about spinning. This is not about creating some smoke and mirror image. That's not what this is about. Any chief that says, hey, you need to come and help my department have a better image, my first question is typically, well, what are you going to do?
Right.
What are you going to do to change? He goes, well, that's what you're supposed to do. No. What are you going to do as a leader to change the culture, to change what is happening, to be the image that you want me to sell? So is that professionalism? Is it integrity? Is it constitutional policing? Is it the value of diversity? Once you put that into play, I will be your biggest cheerleader in making sure everyone knows that. But what I'm not going to do is try to sell a bill of goods. If you're actually not doing all those things, nothing's going to help you.
But there has to be investment from them. There has to be, obviously.
100%.
They're the leader of the department. You're a supporter of their vision to drive.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've been in Baltimore and Atlanta and some larger cities, and obviously those things very diverse in their communities and trying to serve so many people. How do you take care of a community that has so many different views, values, and obviously, I would assume all want safety, but
absolutely.
How do you address everyone? Obviously, you can't make everybody happy.
Well, you can try. If everyone's safe, I think that would make everybody happy. I think there's a couple things. One, I think cities need to realize, and most cities realize this, that public safety really is the cornerstone of economic viability. Right away, if the city understands that a city can be economically viable because there's strong public safety, it truly is the cornerstone. So first of all, you need the support there. But then it's really important that the leadership of any police agency not limit their listening to that groupthink group of folks, right? There is no police leader in the world, from Bill Bratton to Ed Flynn to Tony Batts to Michael Burko to everyone I work with, that says, I know everything. And what I think in my small group is going to understand everybody. I'm a huge proponent of community advisory boards where we bring in folks of every different part of our community, whether it be our LGBTQ2 communities, whether it be our Hispanic communities, our Asian communities, our business communities, our education communities, and listen. That's what it starts with. What are the issues that you're dealing with? How do you want to be communicated with? One of the mistakes that law enforcement has made in the past, and changes are happening, especially with social media, is that we've decided this is how we are going to communicate to you. You shall come to a town hall meeting. You know what? Nobody wants to come to a town hall meeting anymore. No one has time. We're all busy. We got kids. We got this. We got that. So we need to listen. How do you want to be communicated with? Some people still might want to come and sit down with the chief of police and listen to the chief talk about things. That's great. But what's important to you as a community? And I think everybody respects, we have to respect as well. We have to respect people's opinions. We might not agree with everyone's opinion, that's fine. But we need to find a way to have that respectful conversation and to understand that people's perceptions are formed by the way they were raised, their educational background, their gender, all these different things, their education, their socioeconomic background, and people see things differently. everybody looks at a police officer and sees something different. And we have to respect that and understand that. And kind of in the past, we might have been our worst enemy because we weren't out there trying to explain what we really are. We were allowing traditional media to do that for us. So we kind of missed the boat a little bit in allowing someone else to form that public opinion for us when we maybe should have been paying a little bit more attention to it.
So you talk about in the past of traditional media, and then obviously things have changed drastically over the year between social media, between just the access to information. So going back, I guess, before even social media, just the fact of things being able to be shared on the computer, challenges that a PIO has faced from that.
Where do you start and how much time do you have? Look, the biggest challenge today, media itself hasn't changed. You know, what yellow journalism, you know, back in the 1800s, that's essentially, it's come around again. Back then, during the times when, okay, now I'm not aging myself because I wasn't alive when this was happening, but I've heard that back in the day, kids would be on the corners going, extra, extra, read all about it, the Titanic sunk. And then there's a kid on another corner going, extra, extra, read all about it, 5,000 dead in icy waters. And whoever had the better headline sold that newspaper.
Right.
That's what we're dealing with today with social media. Whoever has the better combination of headline and picture is going to get the click, which is going to make money for somebody down the road. So media hasn't changed. Titillation, that still sells. You know, scandal still sells. Divisiveness still sells. Corruption still sells. But what has changed is the speed. You know, back when the Titanic sunk, it took us how many days, how many weeks to get that information, and if you didn't buy a paper, you know, there was no television, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward to television, a homicide happened at 5 after 11. You weren't going to hear about it till maybe 8 o'clock the next morning, or maybe noon if you didn't have a morning newscast, or maybe if there wasn't a morning and noon, not till you get your newspaper that afternoon or watch the 6 o'clock news. Now today,
got the 24-hour news cycle.
And the public is often finding out about issues before law enforcement even does. It's really shocking how quickly information gets out. And it all started, the first story to truly break on social media, big national news story to break on social media on Twitter, was the Miracle on the Hudson. That was broke on Twitter before traditional news media broke it. And that was in New York City. Traditional news media not so happy when that happened, right? So that it's really the speed, and that is the biggest challenge, because media can be wrong and say, oh, we were wrong, here's the right information. Law enforcement can't. And as you know, and I know anybody watching this who's in law enforcement knows, you can't walk into a crime scene and look around and go, oh, yeah, I know exactly what happened. I know the MO. I know who did it. I know why, and I know how. And walk out and have that exactly true. It's not. But that's what today's society expects. And we have to find that balance.
And some of that comes from what we call CSI Effect from TV, because their crimes are solved in 30 minutes. Their crimes are solved in an hour. And I think in talking to people, a lot of people understand that part doesn't occur, meaning that 30 minutes and whatever. But some of the technology that they've come up with, or that I'd
love to have some of the TV technology.
And they do believe that exists.
Yeah, Hawaii Five-0, man, oh man. Yeah, Hollywood has done a number. If people could actually see what a homicide detective's office looks like in a major city,
nothing like that. No.
It's nothing like that. God bless the homicide detectives in Baltimore. Detectives in Baltimore in some of our precincts were working in the basement where cells had been taken out, and they would have a piece of board across the toilet, and they had jury-rigged, I probably shouldn't say this because OSHA's going to come running, jury-rigged power down there, and these guys are working in cells. They're working cases off a computer that's I don't know how old, with water dripping. Or in Atlanta, we were in a headquarters building that was full of lead for years and years until they moved. It ain't that pretty. Every cop will tell you it's not so pretty. There are hot seating, very few, actually smaller departments have a better advantage of, detectives actually have their own offices. What? Major cities? No, you're hot seating. I leave, I come and sit in there. It's not that, and I agree. People expect you can pull DNA off everything. People expect that search warrants, if I come knocking on your door, you have to open, because if you don't, someone's going to knock on your door and come running in. So Hollywood has had a pretty interesting effect on law enforcement.
So now, besides the CSI effect and those things, which you bring up dealing with homicide, the PIO should have a very good working relationship with homicide. I mean, major crimes and robberies and those type of things, that's mainly what you're going to get called about, is the most serious crimes against persons. Yeah. So how do you build those relationships? What do you need as the PIO? Because that's usually coming from a homicide point. We don't want certain things out. We got to build a relationship where I know you're not going to put things out that are going to harm my case. But you have to put things out. I mean, there has to be that mutual understanding of our job. So what is your job as a PIO in that role?
Here's the thing. The one thing that everybody wants, the police want, the PIO wants, the community wants, and the media wants, is to make sure the bad guy is held responsible, or bad girl is held responsible for their actions, period. So as a public information officer, you have a responsibility to provide what's legally allowed to the public, but you also have to protect the investigation, like you said. So you have to think, okay, what is in the best interest of law enforcement to ensure at the end of the day we're able to get a case on someone and make sure they're held accountable. That is, it's a very fine balance. You asked at the beginning, what does a PIO need to do? That relationship. It's a relationship of trust. I don't think there's any brand new public information officer who's ever come on the job, whether they're an officer or whether they're a professional staff that have come in, a lot of times a former journalist. I worked for 5 years in the media before I went to law enforcement, and there's this, you're one of them. You're one of the, you're one of those people. How am I going to trust you? And it's building that relationship. It's sitting with the guys and talking with them. It's sitting with them and going, look if we do this, the media is going to cover it this way. If we provide this, this is what's going to happen. I'll go back many, many years ago to Halifax when it's a give and take. So we had a young woman and her daughter that were strangled in their home. We knew who the perpetrator was. We knew the perpetrator was the boyfriend. We knew it. But of course, the homicide detectives say, don't say that the perpetrator is known to the victims. And I went, if I don't say that on a Friday night of a long weekend, the entire city is going to be freaking out that some stranger is breaking into houses and killing mothers and babies. Do we really want that to happen? And they're like, who? So it could, because you see it from a different way, right? The homicide investigator is very focused on this. And I said, is that what we want? Do we want to create that panic? And by the way, the bad guy knows we're looking for him. Because it's always like, well, we don't want the bad guy to know. The bad guy knows. The bad guy knows he did it. So let's just say that, we believe that the perpetrator was known to the victims. And it was fine that way. I get it. I've had homicide, these are funny stories, but they happen. I've had a homicide detective. I got a body in the middle of the street with the steak knife in the heart. Don't say he was stabbed. Okay, but everybody's here with their cameras taking pictures. The media have shots of it. There's a big pool of blood. Everyone has taken pictures of it and posted it to social media. What would you like me to say? I can't say that that's how he died. But if someone says he stabbed, I'm going to say he stabbed. And it's a balance. I get honestly, homicide investigators probably wouldn't want us to say anything about anything. But on the other hand, I think now that there's a beginning of a realization, especially when it comes to crowdsourcing, how valuable information from the public can be. And I think a lot of times now with communications, folks are starting to realize, oh, you know what? We in Savannah, we put the Crime Stoppers text number on crime scene tape, because typically somebody who knows something about what just happened is standing around, right? They don't want to be picking up the phone, but if they got a text there, all of a sudden they're little texting something to Crime Stoppers, they might provide us with that information. And today, with everyone in their phone, everyone with their doorbell cameras, everyone with their security systems, there's this plethora of video and evidence and audio evidence that is available to us that probably wasn't available to us even 5 years ago. And I think now investigators and law enforcement is realizing, wow, the more information we can get, I mean, if I can get crowdsource a video, we had a terror attack in New York a couple of years ago on Halloween night. Everybody's standing there with their phone. And we've got officers going, oh, how do I get what was on your phone? Because that's going to be valuable evidence to us. And the FBI at that point was able to give us their crowdsourcing software. Today, there's crowdsourcing software and there's crowdsourcing availabilities everywhere. And let me tell you, I think that's a game changer. I think there's a lot more public safety because people are starting to realize there's cameras everywhere, and we're probably going to catch you when you do something.
But you do have to have that relationship with your community for them to send it in, and it also goes back to that relationship with the media, that we need them just as much, whether cops like to admit that or not. When we want to find someone, when we have a missing person, when we have a suspect, when we need to get information out to the public, we do have other options now with social media, and we'll go into that. But like here in our Houston metro area, most of the police departments, even the larger ones, maybe have 100,000 followers, 400,000. Our news stations in Houston have 6 million, right? I mean, so there's a huge difference in getting that information out. So you've spoke that the PIO normally is not linked or tied to the investigative unit. They report to admin. They are part of...
Hopefully to the chief executive, not just to admin, but to the chief executive.
So why is that?
It's hugely important that whoever the head of that public information team is, you might actually have a team of 5 or 6 officers in a big department, or one person in a smaller department. They need to have direct access to the chief executive, because part of the PIO's job is to tell the emperor when they're not wearing any clothes. It's not comfortable, but sometimes the boss needs to understand, boss, if you do this, this is what the community is going to see and hear. Your job is to be, the PIO's job is to be that sounding board. If you do this, by the way, I'm going to be the fire prevention officer. If you do this, this is how the public might perceive it. So maybe we should think about doing it a different way. When bad news happens, and a good public information officer has their ear to the ground with their community and has their ear to the ground with media. And if those relationships with the media, I'm going to have a reporter calling me going, hey, we got someone who's calling us that just said one of your officers swore at them when they did a traffic stop, and we're planning on doing a story. That's a relationship. Then I can go right to the boss, whether chief, sheriff, director, superintendent, commissioner, and say, boss, we got something brewing here. So I'm going to start preparing something. Here's the thing. If I, as a PIO, had to then report through a captain, who reported through a major, who reported to a chief of staff, who then reported to the chief or the sheriff, guess what? Anything that's bad tends to get a little bit watered down.
Play a telephone game.
There you go.
Right.
So by the time the chief hears that, he's gonna hear some idiot thinks our cop was unprofessional. Okay, no, that was actually a well-respected businessman in the community, and he has it on video, and the officer swore at him for half an hour. So that's one of the reasons, and the other goes back to speed. You have to be able to make decisions to release information very, very quickly. And if we have to do an approval chain of 5 people before the chief executive can approve it to get it back to the PIO, you're lost. We talk in the PIO PIO world is that you got about 3 minutes. In a crisis, when something bad happens because of social media, you got about 3 minutes to set a narrative, to get out there with a message saying, hey, this is what's happening. We're looking into it. This is what you can be doing. This is what we're doing. Because if you've developed that trusting relationship with your community, they're looking to you. Hey, do you know this is happening? What are you doing? And we've got to be able to do that. If it takes half an hour for someone to approve us saying we're aware of it, come on. The horse is out of the barn. I mean, it's useless. It's not going to work for you.
So now talking about social media, which certainly has been a game changer.
Oh, absolutely.
In our world, positive and negative game changer. But to what we're just speaking of, while you're not putting it out, and the media may have given you a heads up that they're going to put it out, there's nothing stopping the person who initially recorded it from putting it out.
Yeah.
Or witnesses that see it. I mean, and I think one of the biggest challenges we face is the unknown of what's already out there by our department. So how do we build those relationships? You were in media, so if I'm a new PIO, how do I build that relationship with my local media?
A lot of it is like, how do you build a relationship with anybody? It's visiting, it's learning about their job. I encourage, especially sworn PIOs, to go do a ride along with your local reporter. Find out the pressures that they're under, find out what their goals and objectives are. Every television station, every media outlet has different demographics that they cater to. You know, some of your television stations are you paid for it, we're your investigative, journalism group, or, we're your friendly neighborhood backyard television station. You got to have an understanding of what motivates that reporter. And even reporters themselves, some reporters are very motivated by, I got to get the big story because I want to be a reporter in New York City or Washington, D.C. or L.A. They're going to want to do stories in a very different way than someone who says, boy, I'm really happy living in this community. I want to be a reporter here for the next 30 years. So that reporter is going to want to develop a positive relationship with their police, especially if they're a police reporter, because they're going to be there for a number of years. Someone else who's like, I can hardly wait to get out of here, is going to come in and I want to do that hard-hitting, police are horrible story so I can get out of here and move up, because no one's getting promoted to New York on let's do unicorns and butterflies stories about the new police canine, right? So I think that's really important, is to develop those relationships. I don't know who said it, but there's that great quote about it's hard to hate up close. Getting to know folks, and not only the public information officer, chief of police or the sheriff or the constable has to get to know the media, sit down with editorial boards, understand what is the motivation on both sides. Because at the end of the day, you talk to any traditional media outlet, what they want to do truly is provide good information to the public. They really do. I don't think there's one media outlet out there that's saying, oh, we are in business to screw the police. Now, they are all in business. Don't get me wrong.
It is a business.
Huge business. Most television stations especially are owned by about 5 conglomerates in the United States. And those conglomerates report to shareholders. Shareholders demand a profit, and there are ways that people make you watch TV. That's why crises are good. Crises is a good thing, because when a crisis is happening, people are watching TV. When there is weather coming in, why do they spend so much time on weather? Because people turn on the TV when there's potential bad weather. So yeah, it's a business, but at the end of the day, seriously, especially I think if you look especially at natural disasters, you are going to see the cooperation between media and emergency services is pretty extraordinary, because everyone just wants to make sure people are taken care of. Is there going to be rumor? Is there going to be false information that's disseminated? Absolutely. There was a recent MIT study that came out that says that false information travels, I believe, and I don't want to say don't quote me on this because here we are on a podcast, but I think it travels 7 times faster than truth, because false information tends to be, oh, this is something new, oh, this is cool, and they put it out, right?
shocking. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. Because it really is. True information is like, oh, okay, this is happening. Everyone already has this, so I'm not going to retweet it. I'm not going to repost it. But if it's something new and kind of fascinating, oh, we need to retweet this. So that's what makes the huge challenge for law enforcement is really the rumor control. And rumor control has really taken up a lot bigger time now in a public information officer's job, because rumor control used to be, well, we have to wait to watch the 6 o'clock news to see what they say, and if that was right, great. If it was wrong, maybe we can get them to do a retraction, which is useless now. But today, the rumors show up on the internet and spread like wildfire, and if you don't nip those in the bud, oh, you'll be chasing after rumors, and they get legs.
And speaking of that, so as a PIO or as a leader of a department, certainly there's some things that get reported skewed, biased towards a position. At what point do you contact the media to say that was wrong? I mean, what's sort of the guideline that this is unacceptable, we need to handle this?
It's fact. And I think that's difficult sometimes for law enforcement. Media can see a skew a media outlet takes, or even a citizen journalist or a blogger, and be upset by it. Everyone has their opinions. Everyone sees things their own way. But when someone actually misconstrues a fact, one of the examples I used in one of the cities I worked with, the newspaper was calling burglaries home invasions. And they knew there is a huge difference between a burglary of someone stealing lawnmowers from garages to a home invasion. But what gets the clicks? What gets people reading? Ooh, home invasion? Oh my goodness. And I couldn't get them to change that. And that was really frustrating, because that is not only misleading and completely incorrect, but it also created fear in our community.
Sure.
And once it starts affecting community safety and creating fear in our community, that's a hard stop. That's no, we are taking corrective action, and we're taking corrective action now. You can't let that happen. And today with social media, we have the tools to be able to make those corrections, where in the past, if an outlet chose not to make that correction, there would be nothing you could do about it. So that's truly one of the greatest things about social media, is our ability now to hold others accountable for what they're saying.
So, and speaking of that, and I do think we sort of, we're delayed in hopping on social media to use it to our advantage,
yes.
By all means. So what are some ways now that we can embrace social media to build those relationships, to actually, to a point, be our own message?
Look, the first thing, and I think what law enforcement is still just starting to understand now, is that social media is called social for a reason. A lot of police departments still tend to use it as a soapbox. It's like, hey, this is happening, hey, this is happening, and there's no engagement. Social means back and forth, two-way communication. Also, law enforcement agencies have to realize that if they're not engaging on social media, especially Facebook, there's algorithms that will essentially negate you from the feed of the people that are following you if you don't engage with them. So you actually truly need to. And our communities today feel that they need to be listened to. So when they're saying, hey, police, there's a derelict car in my neighborhood, and if that's just going into a hole somewhere and there's no response, then they're getting a little ticked off at the police department. All you need to do, someone needs to be actually monitoring social media all the time and saying, hey, there's a derelict car, we're going to send someone out tomorrow to take a look at that. And that is engaging. That's what the engagement part of it is. So that's part of it. A second part of it, which is really great for law enforcement, is the fact that all the great things cops do, and you know that there's police officers out there doing amazing things in the community every day. Sure. And these are stories that traditionally media might not want to cover. Firefighters get all the good stories. Law enforcement, maybe not so much. And once you post that good news story and your community starts talking about it online, all of a sudden your traditional media go, oh, that story's got 40,000 hits. I think we should do it. So law enforcement now has that ability through social media. If the community's talking about it, now traditional media has to pick it up. So more and more you're seeing positive stories about law enforcement that you wouldn't in the past. And then of course there's what you and I talked about is the holding folks accountable. Where in the past where, if the headline was in 72 point on the front page of the newspaper was wrong, the correction was on page 8 in 8-point type. Now we have the ability through social media to say, by the way, the headline was incorrect. This is the correct information, and you can do it professionally and politely. But I think it is important for law enforcement to make sure that we hold folks accountable. Again, it's not just because I don't like the way this story was skewed. It truly has to be taken by facts. These are the facts. You've got the facts wrong. And I think that's really important.
And one of the other tools, I guess, when we do normal interviews with the media, out of their 5-6 minute interview that they do, there may be 10 seconds, 15 seconds of clips that they'll take out. The ability for us to actually put the full message, pull the full interview, takes away a little bit of ability to misquote or to take things out of context.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of, you do a news conference to provide information to the public. So I don't necessarily need a filter of the media. I want my community to hear the message coming from my chief or my sheriff or my commissioner or superintendent in its entirety. And that's fantastic because I have, and even in my experience in Atlanta, I've seen where they've kind of pulled this from here and this from here, and like 1 and 1 did not make 2. And I'm like, where did you get that information from? Because it was following a narrative that station had already established about a certain incident. And being able today to say, to ask the public, to ask our community, can you go and watch that whole thing? And you'll see that's really not what we were saying. And honestly, in my experience, doesn't really sit well with the community. People in our community are smart. They don't want to be misled. And they get a little upset when they see that the media have skewed something in a certain way. I think it's amusing here in Texas, and I can't remember what city it is. One of the news outlets, their new slogan is, we give you the whole story. I'd like to think that maybe they should be giving us the whole story all along. I don't think that should be a new slogan. I think that should be something that we have an expectation. But media, they've got to fill only so many minutes, and they've got to try to balance out their stories and do what they can. But again, there's profit, there's shareholders, there's pressure of being better than the competition, there's the pressure of being ahead of the competition. So a lot of times in their fight to be first, they're often wrong, and there's no repercussion. And with law enforcement, if we're wrong, there's significant repercussion. So really different playing fields.
Which adds another duty to the PIO is how do you stay on top of what is the story right now, what is important to the news, what's happening around the nation, what they possibly could ask you that has nothing to do with the story at hand or in the community.
That's why I think one of the biggest challenges, made easier today with social media. You have to be a media consumer. As a public information officer, you have to be a media consumer not only with what's happening locally, but what's happening nationally. I think law enforcement learned a very valuable lesson after Ferguson. Questions were asked about so many different things all across the nation. It's changed the way that we've looked at law enforcement. It's made lots of changes and positive changes across the country, but we also need to look at what's going on internationally. When there is a box truck ramming incident halfway across the world, we need to be aware, okay, our guys training for this kind of a terrorist attack? What are we going to say if something like this happens? Is there somewhere in the country where someone is getting white powder mailed to them? Is there a possibility that this could be happening to us? I think police departments need to look widely at what issues are going on. Right now with the Me Too movement, I have no doubt in my mind that many police departments are going to be facing issues with sexual harassment complaints. And and they need to know how to be able to deal with those things. And you have to be, you have to be a media consumer, and you need to be politically astute. You need to understand the stand of your city, the stand of your leaders, and the way your community feels about things. And I think one of the challenges of being a public information officer is you truly need to know your community inside out, because different parts of the country see things very, very different ways. The way a public information officer would respond to an incident in Miami versus Seattle, Washington versus Houston, Texas versus Augusta, Maine are going to be very different. And it's a public information officer's job to know how to communicate with their community and what their expectations are.
Now, one of the expertise that you have is trying to prepare departments for crisis. And you've written a book on that as far as a guide and trying to do that. So obviously we don't want to prepare as the crisis is here.
Nope, that's not preparation. That's flying by the seat of your pants.
So what are some basic guidelines, things that we need to have in place or do prior to a crisis?
Because there's that 3 to 5 minutes to respond, because that's all you got right now. So, right now everyone finds out about something bad happening all at once. Sometimes our community finds out about it before we do. I'm a huge proponent of planning and having some basic messaging created, knowing what resources we will have available to us, because these crises are happening so quickly, and people are looking to us as leaders, especially if we're going to be the lead agency, whether it's an active shooter situation or a mass casualty event or a terrorist event or even a police officer involved shooting or a use of force incident. The community is going to be looking to us for, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? And if we don't have an answer right away, there's going to be someone out there that will have an answer that we're probably not going to like. There are subject matter experts out there. There are highly paid pundits on television that are going to say, well, the police should have done this. They should be doing this. And truly, and this is one of my favorite quotes of all time, loudest voices will be heard until a credible voice speaks. So if you haven't built that credibility with your voice already with your department, and that goes back to developing that image and the relationships, no one's going to listen to you. So you need to have that stuff in place, so when you do open your mouth and say, hey, we've got this. This is what we already have in place. This is what we need you to do as a community. This is what we are doing right now. You need to be able to give your community a sense that you got this. And that's really important. But the speed of it is what's there now. So by planning, by knowing just an idea of what you're going to say, of what resources are going to be available to you, because in the heat of the moment, you forget. In the heat of the moment, we go, okay, blinders on, this is what we need to do. And when we have something prepared that says, oh, right, okay, yes, I need to have someone who's going to monitor social media for me. Oh, yes, you know what, boy, I could sure use a public information officer from the fire department to help me with this. That's all already going to be pre-written for you. And boy, it makes a huge difference when you are ahead of the game at that point, and it's going to make everything just run so much smoother.
It seems that two of the biggest points for the public, and you expressed in a couple of stories from New York, and the great job that they did in the safety of the community during the crisis, and then getting back to normal life. It seems to be the end result is they want it taken care of. They want to get back to some normalcy and safety.
Look, the quicker the conversation moves from debating what happened in the past to looking forward of how things are going to change in the future, that's a key. That same pivot point is when people stop feeling like victims and they start feeling empowered as survivors to do something. Communications plays a huge role in that, because the men and women of the department are out there doing all the hard work. They're the ones out there that are arresting the bad guys, or that are tending to the injured, or whatever is happening, doing the investigation on a police officer involved shooting. The conversation, and sometimes people want to continue to visit, this is what happened, this is what happened, oh, it's horrible, oh, we're all victims, oh, this is so bad. A good communicator's goal is to say, okay, that happened. This is what we're going to do about it. and working together, this is how we move forward. This is how we learn. This is how we get better. That, and also empowering people to do something. I think one of the things that law enforcement often does in crisis is, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And our community sitting there going, well, what can we do? What can we do that's going to help? Because people want to help. And by saying you can do something, and even if it's something as simple, and I know this sounds goofy, but shelter in place. If you see something, say something. Those are valuable messages, because it's, okay, if I see something, I can phone 911. And that shows help. If you have video, please send it to us. Here's the URL. Okay, that's what shared responsibility is all about. That's what Commissioner O'Neill at NYPD talks about, shared responsibility. You are part of our solution. You are part of keeping our community safe. Everybody can play a role in that. And communications, I mean, it's one part, and it's not the most important part, it's not the least important part. It is a part of that team that I think finally is coming into its own with, oh, you know what? We got to do a tactical operations plan. But guess what? We also need to have a communications plan ready for whatever this incident is. And I tell cops, if you're doing a tactical plan, whether it be for a parade, a special event, or a protest, you better have a communications plan prepared for it as well. And I think folks are finally starting to get that.
And on that communication plan, this is if things go bad, if things end well? I mean, is it sort of multi, or it's just covering everything? Two
things. There's your crisis communications manual and your guide that kind of deals with this is what might happen if something goes wrong. But I'm also a huge proponent of a communications plan that dovetails with the goals and objectives of that police agency. So, you know, a chief, a sheriff, a commissioner, a law enforcement leader is going to say, this is where our department is going in the next 2 years. And what are the goals and objectives? If the goals and objectives are, you know, to ensure that we implement constitutional policing, to ensure that people are safe in our community, to ensure that our employees know that they're valued, to ensure that we have enough police officers to get us through the next 5 years, so we have to work on retention and retraining. Whatever that is, there should be a communications plan that dovetails with it that says, all right, this is what we're going to do internally and externally to get you, boss, to that goal, because that needs to be built in as part of the overall strategy of the police department. And, you know, goes back to what we talked at the beginning about a police department is a little bit like a business. You know, we're not in business to make money, but we're in a business of public safety. We're in the business of helping people succeed, and we're in the business of being a really good steward of our towns and cities in which we serve, in those communities. We're all public servants. So we need to make sure that our planning from a communication standpoint is that we're communicating that, because I go back to the men and women in law enforcement are doing awesome things every day. And I think we've done them a disservice in letting other people create that brand for a long time. And now we get that opportunity to say, look at, yeah, you know what? There's folks that aren't the best in every single profession out there. Ours is very visible. But I think folks, no one comes into this business without a heart of wanting to do well for their community.
I agree, Judy, and thank you so much. And to wrap us up, you have a company called 10-8 Communications. Okay, so between that and someone who would need your services from your business, how do they get in touch with you for that? And also, if someone wants to have some PIO training, how they go to a class?
Well, you're kind to give me a little marketing push here. I appreciate that. The company, as you said, is 10-8 Communications, in service, of course. I have a website, www.108communications.com. Folks can go there and look at that. I honestly, strongly believe that every department has some really talented people in there that are good communicators. Sometimes we just need a little bit of guidance when it comes to, you know, What's the culture of our department? Does our department really understand the value of communications? Does everyone in my department share the need for understanding the value of great relationships and great communications? So I'd like to be able to say that I can help folks from that. And there's also fantastic training through here in Texas. ILEA offers great media training. FBI LEDA offers great media training. And it's there. And honestly, it's not just a PIO's job. We encourage leaders and potential leaders that are coming up. They all need to be able to speak. They all need to be able to communicate well. So it's a skill that folks need to learn, and it's also a perishable skill, so you actually have to practice.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
The all-new Planet Ford on 45 in Spring, saluting our incredible law enforcement community. PlanetFord.com, with legendary sales and service from the most award-winning dealer in Ford history, the Ford Whisperer himself, Randall Reed.
I whisper, you save.
Need financing? Meet our helpful experts in auto loan and vehicle leasing for all credit situations with easy and fast approval. Planet Ford, serving law enforcement in the Houston area and across Texas. PlanetFord.com.